Alright everybody, welcome back to the channel. We're here, and today we're going to be talking about Zacian and Zamazenta, and maybe I can help you determine which one is better for you. Not necessarily which one is like better overall, because that'll be determined by the format itself. Before we get into everything, question of the day: who is the best boy, Zacian or Zamazenta? Whatever best means to you, whether it's competitive or which one you'd like to have as a little pet. Whichever one's better for you. If you like the kind of videos, like the video, to let me know. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Join a membership if you are not new here, or if you're new. It's up to you. Whatever you want to do. You get a cool little Goldango badge by your name. But hey, let's go ahead and get into it. So Zacian, back in the day, this would not have been a discussion, right? Zacian was like the choice for everyone. Except unless Zamazenta was just really your diehard favorite Pokemon at the time. Shout out to Will Tank. But basically, it was just much more offensive. It took advantage of its ability better, Intrepid Sword, which gave you the +1 on switching. This didn't even have body press, so the +1 defense didn't even matter much, especially in Dynamax, where you could the opponent could just boost their stats to counter this, and you couldn't even take advantage of it, right? Especially with like the Fairy Steel typing just being objectively better than Fighting Steel. But in this gen, both things offer different benefits and disadvantages now, right? So for example, Fairy Steel is still the best typing in the game. Not really a debate about that. You wall off opposing fairy types. You are immune to dragon. You're immune to poison as a fairy type, which is really good. You're weak to fire and ground, and I want to say that's it, because you also are neutral to fighting, which is usually a big thing for steel types. You resist rock, etc. You hit every single type for neutral except for fire. Zamazenta, on the other hand, fighting steel is a little bit worse, but fighting steel is still pretty good, right? The difference here is that like fighting stab hits opposing steel types, whereas fairy steel does not. And I do think that that kind of matters in this format, where Zacian doesn't really have stab ways, at least, to hit Zamazenta, for example. And other steel types, like that you don't really see that many, like Metagross and everything, and the most common steel type is probably going to be Goldango. However, all the Terasteals that you might run into, which matters, right? Terastalization, common Terastalizations matter in these formats. Like what is it called? Landorus, for example, has now taken a lot of Terasteel, and Zacian wouldn't really be able to deal with that, while Zamazenta can deal with it more easily, at least in my opinion, right? Because its special defense is base 140, so you're less likely to get blown up by Earth Power than the base 115. Another thing is their stat distribution is vastly different. So Zacian is, like I said, much more offensive mind, faster. This was a little bit slower, but still very fast, much more bulky. This typing gives you a little bit more defensive versatility, while this gives you more numerical bulk, which is something to consider. So like whether it's like the stats or the typing that you value more, you have to decide that for yourself, right? Because you get more resistances and immunities here, whereas with this you just get more flat raw numbers, plus you get the Dauntless Shield ability. So I think that's something that's gonna matter to a lot of players. Something else I wanted to talk about is the ceiling versus the floor of these Pokemon. I think that Zamazenta has the higher floor, meaning it's a little bit easier to pilot for most players, in my opinion, or will be easier to pilot for most players, in my opinion. Keeping its floor pretty high, you're far less likely to have a hard time, I think, using Zamazenta in this format than you will with Zacian. And on the other hand, Zacian's ceiling is going to be way higher. Yeah, I think if you can master how to play your Zacian, it's going to give you way more benefits than you would have with Zamazenta, because of a number of other factors which I'll get into. So the reason why I think their floors and ceilings are so vastly different in that way has to do with, one, their ability. I think raising your defense and having a defensive ability like this that isn't just blown up by like Intimidate is one of the more important things that this Pokemon has going for it. Your boost just isn't wiped away on switching from Incineroar, versus this, you get rid of the attack stage, and now it's like it's still a really strong Pokemon, but not as strong as it would be with the +1, basically a choice band boost. And that matters, right? Because the most common intimidator is Incineroar. And this Pokemon has a decent matchup into it, because it has the fighting type stab, and it has like the body press, which we'll get into in a little bit as well, which gives you means to hit Incineroar, while also Incineroar can't reduce your damage in that way with Intimidate, which it can to Zacian. And then Intimidate also, not only does Intimidate work against Zacian really well, but the Steel and Fairy typing, neither one of those hits Incineroar for like super effective, right? So Incineroar was a hard check to this Pokemon when it was stronger in the last gen. It's definitely gonna be a hard check to it in this gen, even though it was still phenomenal. but that those kind of things matters. And like if you're a player who struggles with like playing against Incineroar, you might consider Zamazenta over Zacian, for example. On the flip side, however, this Pokemon being much more offensive and this one having like the steel fighting typing and the defensive body presses is like best offensive move. You struggle more against like mons like a Mungus, which kind of just sit in front of these kind of defensive Pokemon and just puts them to sleep and doesn't go down. Whereas Zacian is much more threatening with the attack boost to something like a Mungus. So if you're someone who struggles playing against stuff like a Bungus, then I would recommend, you know, something like Zacian over Zamazenta, because you're fighting, a Bungus already resists fighting, and then you need a couple of body presses to really do any significant damage to a Bungus, and then it's just gonna redirect you, right? At least with this, if you're being redirected, it's off like Behemoth Blade, 100 at +1 off of a 150 base attack stat. And if you like Jolly Max, it's like 202, right? That's still doing significant damage to a Mungus, whereas this is not. I want to talk about their coverage. So they're both going to be very physical mons, right? Their special attack stats are 80 and 80. Both of them are 80 respectively, yeah. And it's pretty whack. But they both have decent physical coverage. Zacian's coverage is much more versatile and useful. I'm really looking at the wrong thing. There we go. Zacian's coverage is going to be much more versatile and useful in a sense. They have similar moves, right? They both have access to Play Rough and Wild Charge, but I don't think that matters for Zamazenta as much as it does for Zacian. Because of the +1 attack boost and the higher attack stat, I think having much more versatile physical coverage is a plus for the dog, because you just hit more things, right? Your stabs are Behemoth Blade and Play Rough, so you kind of hit everything for a neutral except fire. Sacred Sword is a neutral into most types that these don't hit as well, such as fire. Also hits Incineroar, hits opposing steel types that Play Rough and Behemoth Blade don't. Wild Charge is good coverage for things like the water types that you may run into that maybe you want to get a little bit extra damage off, because this is base 90. For example, this is base 100, so with stab is like 150. But super effective Wild Charge into water types is 180. So maybe you want a little bit extra damage, you can tech Wild Charge on it, depending on the team composition, right? So it gives you much more versatility, i.e. that higher ceiling, right? Team building ceiling on Zacian is very, very high. Zamazenta, this is kind of the coverage that like matters on it, is steel coverage, so Behemoth Bash or Heavy Slam. I kind of prefer Heavy Slam, and I'll get to that in a minute. Body press, and then crunch, because Heavy Slam kind of struggles into stuff like Calyrex, because it's also very heavy, even though Zamazenta I think is heavier. Body press can't touch it, but at least with this, you can kind of catch them on the Terra Fairy if you're one of your teams coming forth from the Terra. And while you probably are not going to run crunch on this, I think this is its best non-stab coverage move, because you don't touch ghost types very well. So like if Goldengo ticks up, body slam and body press and heavy slam just can't touch it, and Behemoth Bash can't touch Goldengo. If you really want to use this Pokemon, you might have to tech on something like crunch, right? But the reason its other coverage doesn't matter as much, such as these moves that you see down here, like Fire Fang, Ice Fang, Wild Charge, Play Rough, etc. It's just because you're not really going to even this thing to be offensive then in that way when body press is your main stab. You're probably going to invest in your health more, maybe some speed, maybe some of the defense, maybe some Spadefs to stay alive, because you want to keep this thing on the field, body pressing and iron defensing and body pressing. Which brings me to the next point. They are different levels of setup. I think as it stands right now, Zamazenta's setup is easier and probably a bit more effective because it's easier, because you can still get this Intimidate cycle down. And if you're running Swords Dance on your Zacian, you have to drop an attack, because both these mons require Protect, in my opinion, right? So you're running Behemoth Blade always. There's no world where you're dropping Behemoth Blade ever. So you're either running Sacred Sword or Play Rough. Play Rough is really nice because, like I said, you hit all those dragon types, and that's kind of important. There's a lot of times where I'm playing with this mon and I'm like, dang, I wish I really had Play Rough right now, right? And on the flip side, Sacred Sword feels kind of necessary, because if you run into a defensive setup Pokemon that's setting up as much as you, but you're getting intimidated down and they're not, you need a way to break through that. Not to mention, you don't want to get walled by other steel types such as Zamazenta and Zacian. So you kind of have to have a way to hit those. But on the ceiling end, we saw, like, me and some friends were like in call, and we saw like a +3 Behemoth Blade do like 65% to like Goldengo. So if you can manage to get that setup off and not get intimidated down, or clear the Incineroar before it can cycle you back down to neutral or to like just a +1 or +2, then you can start dwelling out so much damage on this thing. On the flip side, like I said, I think this is just easier to handle for most players and a little bit more effective. Just like on turn 1, Body Press has the +1 damage and can't be intimidated down. Heavy Slam, most things that Heavy Slam does big damage to, even at -1, it's still going to do big damage to. I'm pretty sure -1 Heavy Slam still KOs Flutter. I haven't run any calcs on Behemoth Bash, which is a move that you can run, but Heavy Slam into most targets I'm pretty sure it's going to be base 120 power, because of how heavy Zamazenta is. And then the Iron Defense is just very straightforward, because your Iron Defense needs to boost your defense just to stay on the field. So like, even if you're not doing as much damage with these moves, they're not taking as much. So you're going to get more out of this than someone who's struggling to get, like, who's not really good at playing Swords Dance Mons. This is safer in a sense, because you're boosting your offense and defense at the same time. So you get a lot more value out of this, I would say, each time you click it once. Versus like this gets really, really greedy after you start clicking it too many times. But sometimes you can click an extra Iron Defense because the damage, getting the damage down is not as important as staying on the field. Now you do have to worry about critical hits, which goes into the team building aspects of both these mods. I think that Zacian has a more versatile pool of teammates than Zamazenta does. Typically with defensive setup mods, it becomes a bit of Protect the King. So redirection, recovery, like side recovery, whether it's grassy terrain or pollen puff or life dew or heal pulse. It becomes a lot of that, right? Because you want to give this thing time to sit on the field and boost the defenses until the point it becomes unkillable. So you run things like a Amoonguss next to it, or Fake Out next to it, or Ogerpon next to it, etc. Zacian fits on more different kinds of team compositions. Most commonly you'll see it like on balance with like Incineroar, Urshifu, probably in Rain, for example. But like, you don't have to run those mons for it to be good. You can run other good Pokemon, and then let this be your like Fairy and your Fairy Dragon Steel core, or your Steel type and your Fairy Dragon Steel tour with like Flutter Mane and Ragey Bolt and all those good mons, because it's so threatening immediately. And if it gets a Sword Dance, it's so threatening that people may have to target it down really heavy. And even without redirection, that makes this kind of like a pseudo redirector, right? Because the teammates now can do what they want because people are worried about the Zacian setting up. Or it becomes much more punishing to, you know, protect the front of one of your offensive teammates, because now this thing could just sneak a Swords Dance in there. So I think that this has a more versatile pool of teammates. But if you're like very comfortable with redirectors and like healers, then Zamazenta is definitely the way to go for you. More of a balanced player, I think that Zacian and the Crown is probably the way to go. Yeah, because like I said, it's just so offensive versus this. And this one, you're not really worried about getting crit as much because you're trying to do damage. You're not here for a long time. You're here for a good time, not a long time with the Zacian. But for this one, you're trying to be there for a long time. So you have to consider all the things I mentioned with the redirectors and healers, because you're gonna get crit. Like it's Pokemon, you are going to get crit. That also goes to the Terra typing as well, right? I think Zacian has a few more Terra types that it can use more effectively. So sometimes, like I've used grass, my boy Kaga's used grass to avoid Amoonguss. Some people use fire to avoid burns and fire type damage, but you're still weak to ground, but some people can kind of handle that. It's like whatever. You could even try Stellar, because Stellar will boost all of his attacks. So Behemoth Blade, Sacred Sword, Play Rough, for example, all will get boosted by Stellar. Obviously Play Rough and Behemoth, they get boosted once. And I can remember what I said, you're here for a good time, not a long time. One big Stellar boosted +1 or +2 Behemoth Blade is going to do so much damage to stuff. And then a Play Rough is going to do so much damage. Sacred Sword is going to do so much damage. So you can run different types on this. You can run water if you just want that bulky water type thing here. Zamazenta, it feels like it kind of just has to be water most of the time, because it's fighting type typing already resists Urshi Dark, so those crits aren't as bad into your +2 defense, +3 defense. And then water, because again, you have to worry about Urshi Water critting through your boost, and I think that's important, right? And because like grass sometimes is a bit weak to like flying, for example, like Bleak Windstorm, I'm not sure how well grass would work, but I think it actually could be fine. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe grass is fine on it, because you can use it to like avoid the Amoonguss redirection, which could be nice. But then like stuff like Heat Wave is kind of bad. So like water really might be the only choice for you here. While this thing can run defensive ones, offensive ones, this one is mostly running a defensive one because it is a defensive Pokemon. I'm gonna do a quick exercise. It's not a tier list, but I'm using the tier list because it has all the pictures I need. I'm gonna go through the restrictors just really quick because I'm trying to wrap the video up. Just to see who I think has a better matchup into each of the restricted. So for Karada, I think if it's in the middle, that means they both have a decent matchup into it. So I'm kind of split. Karada, I think they both have a decent matchup. Because this threatens the fairy type moves, you at least force this to switch or Terra every single time it's in front of you, right? If we force this to make a defensive play, switch, Terra, or protect, because play rough just sends it to Narnia. Now Terra Fire would then have a better matchup into Zacian, whereas Zamazenta would have the better matchup into it. But just on like on leads, I think it's a kind of neutral. I think that for these, I think Zacian has a better matchup into this because this outspeeds, threatens the KO with play rough, and also threatens the Behemoth Blade KO into the common Terra Fairy types. Whereas this, the defensive setup doesn't matter as much to Miraidon because it's a special attacker and it's hitting this back for neutral anyway, and this doesn't hit it for super effective. It resists steel, and +1 body press is not going to KO this thing. And neither is like heavy slam because it resists, like I said. So I think this, I think Zacian has a better matchup into Miraidon. Terrapagos. This one is a bit strange for me because this hits it for super effective. But while this is setting up, this is also setting up. So that could be a bit strange. And the same goes for this, right? So maybe that one goes in the middle. Maybe they both have a decent matchup into this one. Mewtwo, everything has a good matchup into Mewtwo. They both can set up in front of Lugia. Ooh, I think that I think they both struggle into Ho-Oh a bit. So the matchup is about the same because Sacred Fire kind of neuters both of them. But you know, I think I'm gonna no, because body press even at +1 billion doesn't really hurt this thing. But then neither does Zacian stab, right? So I'm gonna put that in the middle as well. Ooh, Kyogre, I think that Zamazenta has the better matchup into Kyogre. Because they both outspeed, but this one just has the more neutral special bulk. Remember I mentioned about this typing versus the stats? It's raw stats and it's common Terra Water, which is both like Terra, just gives you a really good matchup to this. I think that this one has a better matchup with the Groudon because its +1 defense is going to protect you from the +1 blades, and its Terra Water is going to protect you from the fire type moves. Whereas this kind of struggles into Groudon a bit, right? Because you can't KO it back easily. It forces you to Terra, and your Grass Terra that you might run is not enough. Stellar Terra is not enough. Fire Terra is still pretty rough. Yeah, so I think like Water Terra would be good, but again, you might not be running Water Terra. Whereas this, you are running Water Terra. So I think that Zamazenta has a better matchup with the Groudon. Rayquaza kind of just both just kind of dunk on Rayquaza. Dialga, I think Zamazenta has a better matchup into because like oh, you know what though? I'm trying to think because you resist steel, it's steel type moves, but it's dragon type moves, or you resist dragon as well, versus being immune to dragon. What is a special attacker? But you resist its special attacks. Versus this, like it can still hit you with like flash cannon for decent damage. And body press does more than what the Sacred Sword does, right? On lead. So I think I'm gonna give the Dialga matchup to this. These count as one Pokemon, by the way. But into this one, I think you obviously have to go with Zacian, right? And that's if you're running play rough. This is all pending you're running like play rough, but the Fairy Stab forces this to make a decision. And it does so much damage at +1. It probably just KOs that Dialga at +1 versus this is neutral. Even Sacred Sword does a lot of damage to this. This one is definitely Zacian. Steel hits it for neutral, and body pressures can't touch it. And Heavy Slam is too slow, and you're not gonna have enough offenses for Behemoth Bash to do anything into Giratina. So that goes there. I'm not going to use Zacian and Zamazenta. Oh, you know what? I guess I will, right? I think Zacian is stronger into Zacian. I think Zacian is stronger into Zacian and Zamazenta. Reshiram, I think you're better into Reshiram because, yeah, I think you're better into Reshiram, and I think you're better into Zekrom. Yeah, 'cause I think I think being a Terra Water type and body press hitting this for so much damage for like neutrally, whereas like this resists steel and it's neutral to fairy. At least with fairy you can hit this super effective. So, and it's really slow, right? So it doesn't really matter. This one, oh my god, all of the Kyurems though, Zacian just torches. Zacian torches the Kyurems. I'm not putting these in anything. You have a way better matchup with the Solgaleo. This thing struggles against like just the pure steel typing a little bit, whereas this has the body press. This is Zacian has a better matchup into Lala. Once again, Zamazenta has a better matchup into this. The ghost types always gonna go to Zacian. And Crozma, no one's using that garbage. I think the steel and I think the fact that Zamazenta here, Zacian can't be touched by poison or dragon means it just walls this completely, right? Calyrex ice, I think Zamazenta has a better matchup into it. Like, you probably don't want to click wide guard, but it has wide guard. You resist ice and your defense is really high, so you're not getting cooked by like high horsepower the way this would probably take like 50 to 60%. Like high horsepower, I'm pretty sure it's a 2-shot into this, whereas I don't know if it's a 2-shot into this. I have to run the count. And ghost types once again always here. So while Zacian clearly has a better matchup into more restricted, you look at the list, right? Overall, you might say that like Kyogre, Groudon, Cali Ice are like a really strong grouping to be good into, right? Even if you're not as good into, even if this is better into a higher number of restrictors, like its best matchups are 1, 2, and then like Lunala here is like the good ones. The rest of these aren't even that great of restrictors to begin with, so you're not really that concerned here. And these are like 3 huge heavy hitters. Like these are 1, 2 maybe heavy hitters depending on how the format shakes out, and a good restrictor versus like 3 pretty heavy hitters. So I think that's important. And then like these 2 here heavy hitters as well that they're both pretty decent into. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Which would you prefer competitively? Who's going to be better at the start? Who's going to be better at the end of the format? Who's the best boy? Like, subscribe, all that YouTuber stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.